Okay, I think we're live. Just, just wait and see who trickles in. There's always at least one or two people who are aware of my streams when they're taking place. Fortunately, not too many more. But I took the advice of a subscriber and decided to stream more frequently. Frequently, in this case, twice in 1 week, which is unusual for me. For those of you who've followed my channel, will know. Uh, and just thought I would make a short video about some of the goings on, particularly, and I was forced to think about this the other day, even though the fact that it occupies any of my brain space is annoying to me. The January 6th committee investigating the Capitol Hill incident has begun its hearings, apparently, with Liz Cheney issuing a bold broadside against former President Trump. And one of the things that gets me whenever I think about this is how the Cheney family, how the Bushes and Cheneys have been exalted by the liberal establishment, which despises Donald Trump for some reason. And I think one of the main reason, putting aside, and people have pointed this out, Glenn Greenwald pointed this out in some of his columns, or some of his blog posts, that what really annoyed them more than anything else about Donald Trump was that he didn't take the intelligence community's statements at face value. He didn't value the spooks and defense establishments priorities. And hey, Bo for Speed. Oh, cool. First, 2 Timothy 2:15. It's funny. I was actually talking about some of Paul's epistles to Timothy, the last letters he wrote while he was in prison in Rome, shortly before facing execution. And it really is amazing. I was telling someone in church about this, the foreknowledge of God, that he kept Paul in this state where he was able to preach unhindered, even though he was in a Roman prison facing death during a wave of persecution of the early church by the Caesars. He was able to keep him there for these 2 years, just preaching, essentially unhindered, having the gospel go out among, and Paul references this, among the guard, his Roman captors, the Caesar's household itself. So you had chamberlains for for important Roman office holders who were exposed to the gospel and got saved and actually became part of the body of Christ as a result of this decision, which, on the face of it, yeah, in the midst of the storm, exactly. In the midst of it, it looked like a blunder. Paul returning to Jerusalem and facing an incredibly hostile audience, a group of uh, vi- uh, a group of Jews who were very zealous for the law and who were inimical to the gospel message, and who were going to try to thwart Paul, and probably, as it describes in the book of Acts, trying to kill him essentially. But even though this decision, which he was warned against, Agabus, a prophet, actually showed him what was going to happen. He bound him, and he said, "You'll be bound and handed over to the Gentiles." So uh, this looked like a a boneheaded decision on Paul's part to to go to this festival, to go to return to Jerusalem, and God used it to proclaim the gospel in the seat of power on earth, in the heart of the Roman Empire, and allowed this message to go forth and be heard by everyone. And he was even able to preach to his brethren, the Jews, who were inquiring. And at the end of the book of Acts, it describes this, how they put questions to him, and some were confused, and essentially uh, he he kind of washed his hands of preaching this message to them, and he was an apostle to the Gentiles. So it is kind of interesting how something that at the time, a decision at the time that looks like a poor decision, like a misguided decision, is actually used by God for something of immense purpose. Uh, yeah, standing in the midst of the storm. That's that's the attitude we should have. Hey, Alejandro. Oh, thanks. Yeah, I got. I actually I shaved for an acting role. The yes, yesterday I was shooting a scene, or actually several scenes, in Brooklyn for a project. So they made me shave and pretend that I had glasses, although that's that's not much of a stretch at this point. My eyesight, I probably will need glasses, corrective lenses, sometime in the future. Although the glasses I used for the role yesterday were reading glasses, which was very it was it was not it's not the easiest role, wearing reading glasses while you're trying to move from one location to another on film. So, but it worked out. I know I don't like. I generally don't like shaving, but every so often the facial hair gets out of hand, so I have to step in and rectify the situation. Um, but anyway, yeah, Paul, the entire Paul's epistles, the church epistles, the Pauline epistles in general are really worth worthwhile reading them, to see the sort of attitude that a disciple of Christ should have, and working out even the even the decision to go to Jerusalem and to disobey. As Agabus said, the Holy Spirit gave him this message. So the decision to even that decision was kind of self-willed on Paul's part. I don't think it was necessarily um, what God's specific plan for Paul was at that time, but obviously he had a plan to use Paul to preach to the Romans, and this was a means of accomplishing that plan. And I think, in some sense, this is it's a good argument for compatibilism. This idea that you had Paul, his own will wanted one thing, to go to Jerusalem to participate in this ceremony and to meet with some of the brethren in the church there, but you also had a greater will and a plan that God had devised, and this was an instance um, of the two working out together, or God working it out through uh, this situation, and affecting as well to have the gospel preached in Rome. Uh, so yeah, the epistles are definitely worth reading, and the Book of Acts, which describes what took place, obviously up until the point of uh, Paul's imprisonment in Rome. Anyway, getting back to the January 6th thing, I think Greenwald's point, it's worth considering, because I think this was the main sticking point. It wasn't so much that Trump was such a breach with past presidencies. I mean, even some of his immigration proposals, when you look at it, they weren't that startlingly different from the platforms of major party nominees, 20 or 30 years ago. Even during the Clinton administration, there were proposals to restrict certain forms of immigration. Of course, you had the Jordan Commission, whose recommendations Clinton rejected. But even so, there were, in terms of domestic policy, I don't think there was a huge difference. Although obviously there were things that were distinct, like the Supreme Court appointees. Trump was, if the Dobbs decision is actually released as it was written, it'd be right to say that he changed domestic policy more than any of his predecessors in recent history in the 20th century. But I think the main reason to explain the antagonism between the media and Donald Trump is the fact that he rejected this bipartisan consensus on foreign policy, and particularly on intelligence matters, but not so much in terms of any sort of actual legislation. More so, he rejected the view that these people should decide everything, that this group of unelected bureaucrats and intelligence assets and members of the Defense Department, the higher upper echelon, that they should decide everything, rather than these decisions being made through the expression of popular will, or of the voters. And I think that was the main thing that aggravated him. And this is one of the reasons you see Liz Cheney being the lead, rather than Benny Thompson, or the Democrats who are ostensibly in charge of this committee and are leading this witch hunt. The main face you see and voice you hear is Liz Cheney, which is odd because this is a person who most likely will lose her primary, who will no longer be a congresswoman, and she's been ostracized by her party, so she doesn't wield that much influence. But I think she's been given the lead role here because she represents at its core the defense intelligence nomenclatura in charge of the United States. She's the NSA, CIA figurehead, basically, through her father, Dick Cheney, who was the chairman, who was the Secretary of Defense, and who was an institution in Washington even before he was selected to be George W. Bush's running mate. So the reason you're seeing Liz Cheney rather than any of the Democrats at the forefront of these hearings is because she's the quintessence of this liberal defense intelligence apparatus that saw its saw its control over Washington decision making eroded during the Trump administration. And I mean, there were a number of ways in which this manifested itself, whether it was the rejection of the JCPOA with Iran, or the decision not to go to war with Syria, the fact that he approached Ukraine realistically, even though he sent them weapons. He realized that they were a thoroughly corrupt government. I mean, one of the things you have to laugh at is some of the rationales. Now, Ukraine obviously has a right to defend its country. Russia's decision to invade Ukraine, and the decision of any country to just invade a nation state, regardless of the underlying pretext, is wrong from an ethical point of view, and it's disastrous from a human perspective. But the idea that Russia should be demonized, or that we should automatically support Ukraine, without any restrictions, because it's less corrupt, is so absurdly over the top. I mean, I think on in Transparency International releases these corruption ratings periodically, and I think the last time I checked, Russia was 180th or 170th, and Ukraine was 140th. So yes, Ukraine is marginally, however you define corruption, Ukraine is marginally less corrupt than Russia. But the idea that it's a bastion of good government, or lack of corruption, in contrast to Russia, it's belied by the facts, and it's just kind of ridiculous to claim that and to use that as a talking point in war boosterism. But I mean, that was one of the reasons. So things like that, those were the reasons that Trump was so maligned, and the reason that they actually basically staged. I mean, they called January 6th the coup, but what happened from the time before Trump took office, they were plotting his downfall before he was even elected. So that up until the point he left office, there was a constant, a concerted plan to undermine his administration and to remove him from office. So if you don't want to describe that as a coup, I'm not sure what term you would use, but I think it's a lot more apt than whatever happened on January 6th. But I think that's one of the reasons that Liz Cheney is the poster girl for these hearings. Uh, Democrats always love to highlight contrarian Republicans, not contrarian in any good sense, but in the sense that they support liberal talking points and reinforce existing narratives, such as the idea that the CIA and the NSA and the intelligence community should dictate American foreign policy and domestic policy. Um, yeah, it's kind of it is an exercise in futility. It's sort of you're spinning your wheels if that's what you're trying to do. But I think it's still good to point out uh, how obnoxious this is. That the people who were ousted when Trump was elected, and which the American people have repeatedly expressed a disinterest in having lead them, that they're still clinging to power and doing everything. And as other people said, this is probably part and parcel of them trying to thwart Trump from running again, which I don't know how they could legally do. One of the ideas is to prosecute him, and even though there's no prosecutorial powers attached to this committee, they can theoretically drum up enough publicity so that the Justice Department decides to go after Donald Trump, which is not that far fetched when you consider the fact that in Michigan, three of the potential challengers to Gretchen Whitmer were thrown off the ballot by the Supreme Court, and another one was literally arrested for his supposed role in January 6th, which I'm not sure what his role was, but it was, but it was essentially he's essentially become a political prisoner, even though he was bonded out. I think he's being charged with a misdemeanor, but they're actually creating political prisoners. So this idea that the United States is a bastion of freedom, it, it it's always been a little tenuous, but I think now trying to maintain that is absurd when you look at the fact that there's one party actually trying to criminalize any opposition to it. It's it's hard to maintain that this is a free republic at the moment. Anyway, I thought I would just talk about that a little bit. Give you a short video. Um, oh, okay, that's good. I didn't realize. Yeah, I'm glad some people were notified because the last one, I think there's only one or two. There was Alejandro, and yeah, so no one. I hate the idea of using YouTube to to release to communicate my ideas. It's such an unwieldy platform. Even when they're not actively censoring you, they're doing everything to make it as cumbersome as possible. And that's one of the reasons I like the idea of David Wood moving away from this platform. It's just, yeah, that's a good point. No, I mean, I don't want to besmirch the United States, but it's just kind of depressing to see the amount of freedoms rapidly diminish, particularly after the past 2 years. The idea of using COVID as a pretext to strip away people's liberties, it's not just in the United States, of course. This is something that's happened all across the world. And in some countries, it's even worse. For example, Canada or Australia. Discord, I've thought about that. I'm not a huge fan. I've tried using Discord a couple of times. Uh, to me, it's like a video. It's like a bulletin board with video. Apparently, I'm a bit of a technical illiterate, so maybe maybe Discord is a bit over my pay grade. But uh, I've never really gotten into it. Just the format is a little cumbersome for me, although I know it's very useful for other people, particularly gamers. Maybe that's the problem, that I'm not I haven't been a gamer since I was 12, so that could be an issue. But I appreciate the suggestion. Anyway, I think I'll just wrap this up before we hit the 25-minute mark. and I'll see you all soon. Thanks, Boat for Speed, Alejandro, Tower Time. See you soon.